For the first time since the COVID outbreak, I went back to China for a month and a half earlier this year. Always fascinating to see what life and businesses are like on the other side of the Pacific. I want to share with you my on-the-ground pulse check on the business trends in my homeland. Let's dive in. First things first, I presume you guys all know digital payment in China is more advanced than we have in the West. So let's start there. It's great. You don't need to even carry a wallet if you live a life in China. But the problem is it's pretty inconvenient for a foreigner like myself to use the payment services that they have. Despite being fully fluent in Mandarin, I'm no longer a Chinese citizen. It creates a lot of challenges. So in China, most payment transactions are conducted either through WeChat Pay, which is owned by Tencent, or Alipay, which is owned by Alibaba. To be able to use these services, you need the following things. One, a Chinese phone number, which is easy to obtain. Once you land in China, you just buy a prepaid SIM card that comes with a phone number. Then you need an unlocked smartphone, which is technically easy too. In the US, you can buy an unlocked smartphone, or once you pass your contract with your carrier, you can ask your carrier to unlock the phone. But I did encounter an unknown security issue when my cousin tried to input her credit card information into my WeChat app, downloaded from the US iTunes store. Alipay worked just fine. And finally, that's the toughest part, is you need a Chinese credit card, because these payment services do not like to use the Visa and MasterCard payment rail. So in China, credit card companies sit on the UnionPay credit card rail, and it is really hard to obtain if you don't have an identity or live in China. I don't think I can get a Chinese bank account and a credit card on a tourist visa. That was the biggest deterrent for me to use WeChat Pay or Alipay. My cousin ended up giving me her Xiaomi phone with her phone number and payment information preloaded. Once you overcame the hurdles, the experience of using WeChat Pay and Alipay is great. To pay, either you're scanning the merchant's QR code or the merchant is scanning yours. Preferably, you should have both WeChat Pay and Alipay, because some merchants only accept one of the two, but not both. As I said, Chinese credit card use UnionPay as the credit card rail. But I did not encounter a single merchant that even accepts credit card. They don't even have a credit card swiping machine there. However, cash is still allowed, probably because of government regulation. You can even use the QR code generated by these two apps to take buses or the subway. I use Alipay to take the subway and buses in Shanghai, Beijing, Chengdu, and even Hong Kong, which had its own system for tourists but has seen Alipay enter the market in recent years. I always wonder why QR codes are not prevalent in the United States. Maybe you know why. My conjecture is credit card usage is so deeply entrenched as a habit that it makes it hard for both merchants and consumers to be receptive to QR codes. Unlike in China, where WeChat has owned its spot as the super app, there is no single app that dominates in the US. Perhaps Apple, by the virtue of owning enough share of the total mobile user in the US, can change that, but we'll see. It's kind of tragic because QR payments is pretty convenient. The danger, while I still think is really minor, is without cash transactions, it's really easy to lose track of your daily spending. It feels really great when you're swiping things, but remember, real money is going out of your pocket. Maybe the Chinese are just so used to it. By the time I'm making this video, things have changed for the better, that WeChat is actually allowing people with Visa or MasterCard credit card to input their payment information. I think next time when I go back to China, I don't have to use my cousin's phone anymore. I can just use my own WeChat app to pay for things in China. I'm so excited about it. You won't survive in China without a smartphone. It's probably less true in the United States as long as you have a wallet. In China, every ticket you buy is in the form of a QR code, authenticated with your ID card. It's just a matter of time before the Chinese store their IDs on the phone as well. All your personal and work communications are done on the WeChat app. Email is not big in China, which is why WeChat was able to become the super app in the first place. So you need your phone at all places. Huawei and Xiaomi have fancy physical stores in China. Their phones are cheaper and functionally equivalent in my opinion. Some high-end Xiaomi models even have Leica lenses. It's a big selling point for photography enthusiasts like myself. I don't see how the iPhone can compete in China. And because there's so much dependence on smartphones, there are businesses that cater to it that don't exist in the US. For example, you can easily find a Meituan phone power banks because you don't want your phone to run out of battery and you can't pay for things or access your train ticket. It's definitely a unique feature of the Chinese economy. so much money piled into developing mega malls like the ones you see on the screen in Shanghai. Like there's no foot traffic on the floors where there are only retail stores. I don't know how these mega malls can survive in the long run knowing how robust e-commerce is in China. I was chatting with my elementary school classmate who works for a global brand. Many merchants in China are cannibalizing their own sales by aggressively discounting the same products on digital channels such as Tmall and JD. Who will pay full price in physical stores when they know they can get the same goods at Tmall for half the price? If merchants are aware of these trends, which I hope they are because numbers don't lie, it's just a matter of time before mall operators suffer as merchants shrink their physical presence. The benefit for consumer is when you go to the mall, there are incredible number of food choices. During lunchtime, if it's a mixed-use building where the office is part of the mall, it fills up really quickly with office workers. And of course, meal delivery workers. As a percent of an average white-collar worker's salary, eating out in China is way more affordable than in the United States. So I get why there are so many restaurants. And you can have all the choices you want in these malls for food. It's amazing. Along the discussion of overinvestment in physical shopping malls, big money is being poured into developing old towns on the outskirts of Shanghai. And I presume that's true for other major Chinese cities as well. I visited a couple of these towns this time. They're very nice. These fake towns are pretty visually appealing, but there might be a saturation at a certain point, in my opinion. When Chinese people got money, they're always looking for the next new things to experience and spend money on. But they also get bored pretty quickly. It's similar to how after visiting many European countries, they all start to look the same to me. A town square, some outdoor dining, and maybe a canal. After a while, people just get bored. Global brands are still incredibly expensive in China, and that's why my relatives love to ask me to buy it from outlets in the US and bring it back when I go visit. Maybe it's because of import taxes, or maybe the merchants have no idea how to price their products, or maybe the merchants just think the Chinese consumer is so gullible. Who in their right mind will pay $65 for a North Face t-shirt? That said, I'm very impressed that China has experienced such rapid growth that the question going forward for a tourist like myself is, what gifts are exclusively available in China that I should bring back to my American friends? Instead of the question I asked like 20 years ago, what American brands can my Chinese friend get in China? Seriously, they have everything. I'm not talking about like KFC, McDonald's, Pizza Hut, which have been around since I left China 20 years ago. I'm talking about Peet's Coffee, Tim Hortons, Shake Shack, luxury brands like Loro Piana, Keatong, Brunello Cucinelli, which I only see in ultra high-end malls in the United States. Look at these Taiguli malls. Upscale mall development in all the cities I visited this time. They surpass any mall I've ever been to in the United States. And I live in New York and San Francisco, so I've seen some nice things. Can't afford them, but I've seen them. In the hotel I stayed at in Beijing, there is an Aston Martin dealership in the lobby. I mean, come on, that's James Bond's ride. That's a reflection of how much Chinese consumption power has grown over the years. Of course, not all Chinese people can afford an Aston Martin, but at least some people can afford it for the British to bother setting up a dealership store there. Sadly, cigarette consumption remains really high in China, and probably in Asia in general. The rules about smoking in public areas have clearly gotten better since I left China a long time ago, which comforts me as a non-smoker, but it's still not strictly enforced. The fact that cigarette stores can exist as a standalone business tells me cigarette consumption remains high enough for it to be a viable business. Most of you probably know the botched US IPO of Didi Chuxing, the Chinese equivalent of Uber and Lyft. But unless you have traveled to China and can read the language, you probably have never heard of 高德地图. 高德 is kind of like Google Map, but in China. So 高德's main function is like Google Map, which is searching for locations and figure out bus, subway, or car routes to get to your destination. But 高德 has the ambition of becoming another super app. And during this trip, I got to use that feature, which is ride-hailing aggregation. So this definitely caught me by surprise. Unlike in the US, where ride-hailing is a duopoly between Uber and Lyft, there's so many ride-hailing apps in China, and 高德 adds value by aggregating them within its app. I don't know why there's so many ride apps in China. Maybe it's just an abundance of dumb VC money, but I guarantee some of them will never scale to a viable business. The analogy here is, remember the amount of meal kit company that popped up in the US a few years back? Look, other than the importance of getting from point A to point B alive, ride-hailing is an undifferentiated service. The abundance of ride-hailing apps have resulted in all-out price war to gain market share, which benefits consumers like me. Gaode's aggregation adds two values. One, they aggregate the supply of drivers and the demand of riders. It's more of a value add to the ride app company, as riders are unlikely to install more than 2 to 3 ride apps on their phone. So the smaller apps will risk not getting enough riders without the demand aggregation provided by Gaode. But it's less of a value add to the riders who can probably find enough drivers using Didi. And the other thing is, Gaode can provide price transparency for consumers, as the app can provide the price of the same ride provided by different apps. So for these value adds, Gaode takes a commission, just like any aggregator or marketplace would. And here comes the problem. Based on my conversation with the driver, you know how Uber drivers in the US always have something interesting to say and they're always complaining, which I'm understanding. So the driver said they actually have to shoulder Gaode's commission. So for example, if a ride costs $20, so say if this driver works for Didi, Didi will take $8 of that $20. Gaode takes an additional $4, leaving the driver with $8. That's a 60%, 60 take rate on a ride. That's pretty steep. I made up the example. I don't know exactly what the take rate is, but you get the point. Instead, I think the ride-hailing platform should bear the Gaode commission, because attracting riders is more important for the platform than for the driver, because the driver can simply choose to work for another platform. And I'm sure many of them multi-home on several ride-hailing platforms anyways. So as a result of the driver being squeezed twice on each ride, they clearly sound disgruntled, which over time doesn't bode well for the platforms as the drivers leave. Now, based on my personal experience this time, the lesser known ride apps employ lower quality drivers. For example, one driver was driving at the speed of 40 kilometers per hour on the highway with an 80 kilometer per hour speed limit. And a few other drivers have cars reek of cigarette smells. So you kind of get what you paid for with these lesser platforms. I can imagine Didi has a pool of higher quality drivers and a stricter complaint resolution mechanism, which probably costs riders more. But that's the pricing power, because we are paying the platform to solve some of these problems. Then once the industry consolidates, I anticipate Didi or whoever the long-term winner is to gain pricing power. It becomes a triopoly, duopoly, or even monopoly, like what's sort of happening in the US. I really struggle to see how all these ride apps are going to survive in the future. Maybe their capacities endure is longer than I thought, as long as dumb VC money keeps piling in. But eventually, I anticipate many players will close down for failing to scale into profitability. And then Gaode can add value as an aggregator in a eventually duopoly or monopoly Chinese ride-hailing market. Just like in the US, meal delivery is a staple service in Chinese daily life, especially in big cities like Shanghai. Both meal delivery and ride-hailing make the most sense in high population density areas. They're essentially a hyper-local logistics business. However, compared to ride-hailing, meal delivery creates far more visible social problems in China. But Chinese meal delivery is mostly done on mopeds by these delivery folks. Charlie Munger famously said, "Show me the incentive and I will show you the outcome." The delivery person gets paid based on the value of the orders they deliver, not by the hour. So as a result, they're motivated to deliver as quickly and as many orders they can to maximize their own earnings. That's fine if they live in their own world. The problem is the delivery people have no respect for the rules of law on the street. They're ultra aggressive against other road participants, and they have no fear for their own life or the lives of pedestrians, car drivers, or anything with a pulse on the street. I've seen them riding in the wrong direction on one-way streets, never stopping for red lights, and even screaming at other bike riders because the bike rider are blocking their way. I've heard from news that many meal delivery people lose their lives for not following traffic rules. They're hardworking people trying to make a living, I get it, but I definitely have pretty mixed feelings about the life of Chinese gig workers, to say the least. China has an enormous population. The restaurant market is understandably large, and as a result, there's so many restaurants and the competition is so fierce. I never confirmed this, but my cousin told me having meals delivered to you is cheaper than dining in, which is absurd compared to how many random fees DoorDash and Uber Eats add on the menu items. I've seen my $13 burrito order easily turning into a $20 bill for no reason, with all these random fees added. I suspect delivery is cheaper than dining in China because restaurants will do anything to sell more items. due to fierce competition and more abundant of labor supplies in China. Chinese meal delivery industry is a duopoly between the publicly traded Meituan and Ele.me, which is owned by Alibaba. The strategy are likely different, as Alibaba can subsidize Ele.me using a cash cow like Alibaba Cloud, while Meituan's playbook is likely more similar to DoorDash in that they need to expand into additional categories like groceries, prescription drugs, cosmetics to improve their unit economics per delivery. Similar to ride-hailing, the fierce competition among restaurants and meal delivery platform is, at least for now, benefiting consumers like myself. For that, as a consumer, I again say thank you very much. So similar to Yelp, China has an app called 大众点评. It roughly translates to people's review. 大众点评 is owned by Meituan, the meal delivery platform. So it combines the feature of Yelp, Groupon, meal delivery, and social media. People become influencers on 大众点评. Having a good rating on Chinese Yelp is pretty crucial, as consumers are willing to pay more for better food and experience. So 大众点评 operates very similarly to Yelp. I learned that they charge thousands of yuans to retract a bad review. The merchants rather provide the goods or service for free in exchange for the consumers not providing a bad review on the platform. And this practice makes sense because redoing a dish might cost hundreds of yuans. That's preferred over paying 10 times more to remove a bad review on 大众点评. For Chinese citizens, most purchases are linked to their government IDs, which is good for preventing a resale market. For those who don't have a Chinese ID, it's very inconvenient. The ticketing website or app requires inputting a Chinese government ID number, and it does not accommodate other forms of identification like a foreign passport. When you go to an airport, train station, or tourist spots, the turnstiles only authenticate Chinese IDs. As a non-Chinese citizen, I had to present my passport to a human being who had to manually verify in order to enter that place. There are certain hotels that I, as a foreigner, could not stay at because they have not registered with the government as being eligible for internationally facing. So this restriction results in foreigners having a smaller supply of hotels compared to the locals. And I suspect the international facing hotels have some pricing power against someone like me. Although I did not encounter this issue personally, foreigners are prohibited increasingly from visiting or staying at certain Chinese tourist spots and cities bordering another country for national security reasons. Ctrip is the most dominant OTA in China. However, Meituan, the meal delivery player that we discussed previously, they're making a push into travel and leisure as well. I got better priced travel packages from Meituan's price competition against Ctrip. This is a typical dynamic in the internet business where everyone wants to encroach each other's territory to expand addressable market and achieve bigger scale. Like its Asian neighbors and the Europeans, China now has a pretty robust high-speed railway system. Price and efficiency of high-speed rails are starting to threaten domestic airlines. The government is investing pretty heavily to add routes that connect the entire country, especially in Western China with pretty challenging terrains. I can see this investment definitely helps boost domestic consumption, such as traveling and for business purposes. And I definitely wasn't going to leave out electric vehicle when talking about China. Unlike in the US, when the Chinese buy a car, the license plate does not come with it. You need to bid for a license, and it can cost you a fortune. You look at the chart right here, a license plate in Shanghai costs at peak almost 100,000 yuan or 13,000 US dollars. It's ridiculous. However, to encourage the adoption of EVs with some ulterior motive of providing tangible stimulus to prolong economic quote-unquote growth, you get a license plate for free as long as you purchase an EV. And the license plate has a different color and it's not transferable to an ICE vehicle should you decide to sell your EV down the road. One of my cousins, I got many cousins, he drives a Xiaopeng, and he said charging is basically entirely subsidized by the state utility company. That also effectively reduces the cost of EV ownership. That's great and all, but with the surge in EV adoption and no barrier to getting a license plate, Chinese roads just get more crowded, especially in metro areas like Shanghai, where the roads were already wildly inadequate to accommodate all the cars on the road before EVs took off. So during certain times of the day, congestion just so ridiculous that it makes everyone wonder why owning a car in the first place. You see, with every solution comes new problem. With new problem, you need new solutions. I don't know if it's a virtuous or a vicious cycle, but that's how the universe works. Now I'm saving the best for last. Despite the issue with Evergrande, property prices in major cities such as Shanghai and Beijing remains ridiculously high. The price to income ratio for housing in China is 35 to 1 versus the average of 4.5 to 1 in the United States. i.e., it costs about 4.5 years of income to afford an average house in the US versus 35 years of income in China. That's the money aspect of it. The high property prices have created serious and prolonged societal problems that could have impacted myself if I stayed in China. There is an oversupply of Chinese men who cannot find a wife because they don't own property. Not to mention, most of you already know there is a growing gender imbalance in China. The societal expectation is men need to own property and preferably other tangible assets before convincing in-laws to marry their daughters. That expectation remains very prevalent. Many conversations on my parents' generation still revolve around siblings fighting for their parents' property. You can't even avoid hearing such conversation when you sit at a coffee shop. It's just deeply ingrained in Chinese life, to the point where there are even reality TV shows featuring siblings fighting publicly about inheriting their parents' property. Look, I understand incentives drive human behavior, considering millions, if not tens of millions of yuans worth of cash-generating real estate in Tier 1 cities is at stake. But it's just really sad to see people willing to disown their siblings or parents without even blinking for just assets and money. That's all I have on China, leaving it on a sad note. Please comment if you have any questions or insights. I definitely look forward to relaunching this series when I visit China the next time. Now, if you want to better understand what it actually takes to break into and do well in investment management, be sure to check out the 2 videos in the next screen. If you found this helpful, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel for future contents on equity research, business analysis, and career advice. I'll talk to you next time. Peace.